Um, I hope you find whatever I talk about useful and not something that all of it you already know. So, all of us read a lot of material from the internet nowadays. It's an attempt to sort of group the things together and talk on the trend that uh, neurosymbolic AI is creating, why, what, all these issues are what I'll be talking about. So, let me first share the screen. Okay, so I hope it's visible.
Yes, madam.
Okay, so I won't be able to see the chat or any of it. So, in case you have any question, you can just speak out. Okay, so what I decided to talk about, knowing that this is already quite knowledgeable in all that's happening today in AI, uh, I'll be talking about neurosymbolic, which, as the name suggests, it's a hybrid approach and is flaunted as the next wave. So, uh, before we get into the details of neurosymbolic AI, let me set the context. So, all of us already know that connectionist AI, or the deep neural networks, has already created quite a wave. And it's already hailed as something like uh, which will be replacing all humans. It's doing fantastic job in many activities. So then why are we still even talking about another wave? Is this not the last wave? That's really uh, what I want to start with before going into the details of before going into the details of what it is and how it is being used. So, uh, let us look at a few success stories. What has really made AI a household name? People who were not even in the computing domain at all, even they are talking about AI. So, anyone on social media who has an account, irrespective of their background, is using the AI info generator, AI image video generator, content generator, and everyone knows the name of AI. I don't think it has happened for any computer science specific area before, other than if you talk about computer or something like that. So, uh, it has not happened for a very specialized area. So, what are the success stories? Writing content, almost any kind of content, whether it's used by students, academic cases, or whether it is by the content writers, that is advertisement creators and so on, creating visual art, of course. So it has become very easy. If you are seeing now that people are writing something and then generating the image corresponding to that using the generative AI tools. Generating stock market trading and investment strategies. So, AI driven stock market trading and investment strategies are all over the place, and all the companies are using it quite successfully. So, we'll be talking the issues in this domain, but as you can understand, stock market trading was never an easy field. No one could actually decipher the thing about how to trade in stock market. Uh, but so therefore the stock market sometimes dips, sometimes goes up. However, at any given point of time, looking at a huge amount of data and predicting what's good, what's bad, that's really working, because that huge amount of data was not possible to be used in any other framework, which actually the connectionist AI systems are doing right now. Similarly, because of learning from huge amounts of data, it's not only writing text cases, but it's also about deciphering speech signals. Again, an area which was very difficult. People who work in uh, speech to text, they know that it was very, very difficult to generate any kind of coherent text from speech signals. It's working reasonably well today, and then also working in multiple languages. Translation, another very important problem which we have struggled with, and many of you, this forum itself, you are saying is 19. If you go back to 19 and look at how funny Google Translation used to be, Facebook Translation used to be, uh, at that point of time. In fact, translations themselves became memes. Today, they do a remarkably good job, again, because of very large architectures and very large volumes of data on which they are trained. We move on now to a little more important and specialized domains, like assisting doctors with diagnosing diseases. And though you may not trust an AI system as such, we do know doctors who are looking at these AI tools. So they are giving the symptoms, and they are asking the AI assistants or co-pilots to suggest what kind of diagnostic tests should be done, what could be the diseases, and so on. So it's not that the patients are directly using these, but yes, doctors are using it. And I have heard from doctors themselves telling me, so I did talk about hallucination, etc., but the doctors are quite adamant that if you ask the junior doctors to do the diagnosis, it may not be as good as what the AI co-pilots are doing. And then the senior doctor is using it, and the senior doctor is there to interpret the uh, decisions and then take it to the patient. However, uh, and you may have also heard about the AMI, which is a system, which is a generative tool, which is actually able to answer all medical questions which come at the entrance level test for doctors in US. I mean, doctors from other world, who other countries, who are going to US to start practice. So that means it's not just the entrance level biology exam, it's actually a medical exam. And EMI, a generative tool, is doing quite well in that. And then a very different kind of application, which is about self-driving cars. So the point is not just about control, but also using a complex web of sensors, cameras, radar based AI systems, which can perceive the surroundings in real time. So what is surrounding? It's about the traffic lights, lane markings, pedestrians who are coming suddenly, cyclists, and so on. Of course, it's not for Indian roads, but in reasonably disciplined areas, and where actually people are there on the road. So it's not just track created for self-driving cars. These are being experimented with, and with reasonable success. So therefore, with all this success, we just look at not all the AI systems, but we just look at, even if we look at even the LLMs, which are large language models. And one of them is ChatGPT, which is out there for anyone and everyone to use. So a lot of people are using it for the first kind of applications we talked about. And so therefore, it actually led to this paper being written from Microsoft Research Lab. They tried a number of things, and the results were so encouraging that they were actually encouraged to write this paper, and it became actually news that artificial general intelligence is already round the corner. And this is a very interesting and difficult prompt. Can you write a proof that there are infinitely many primes? So there's a very mathematical, algorithmic kind of question. However, they are saying with every line that rhymes. So it's a creative way of writing a mathematical thought process. And even in this very complicated thing which a human would not be able to do, uh, at least not all humans would be able to write it using rhyming words. GPT could do it very well. So therefore it's a fairly complex thing, and the algorithm is also right. So therefore this did spark of the interest. But before we jump to conclusion, let us see what AI cannot do so well even today. So though it is doing well in answering questions, providing the decisions about what tests to conduct for a patient and so on, still today's AI systems are not able to explain their decisions well. Okay, so very simple. It's very good in recognizing pedestrians, etc. We said, but if you ask it, why do you think this image is of a pedestrian? Then they cannot tell you that it's because we saw two eyes at a certain height, or we saw it walk in a certain way using 2 feet. It cannot tell why it is. It has taken that decision. I don't know why it is cutting. Okay, I think this was a mistake on my part. Okay, so that's one of the issues. The second is, though it is supposed to be taking decisions, for example, while driving cars, it will take a decision, but it won't be able to decide what is right and what is wrong. Okay, something that we humans do without thinking many times. We also may differ in our decisions from one human to another human, but inherently all of us have some grounding about what is right or what is wrong according to us. So when it comes to, say, a driverless car, uh, it will have to take a decision about whether it will swerve to the right, let us say, to miss a concrete barrier. However, if it swerves to the right, it may mow down some children and dogs who are on the crosswalk. Or should it not swerve and maybe hit directly into a barrier, killing all the four passengers? Of course, it's a very tough decision, even for a human driver. The point is, the human driver doesn't think too much about what's right or wrong in that particular situation, but will take a decision. Okay, it may take a decision that the its passengers are its responsibility, or it may take a decision that children should be given right to life first, and so therefore passengers are old enough, let them die. Whatever it is, they will have some grounding. If you ask the person such a question, that what will you do, they'll be able to say what they'll do, and they'll be able to justify what they'll do. But a AI system which will take the decision will not be able to justify, and so therefore it's very difficult to understand the AI system as such. What is its grounding? And then the other thing that we are seeing now is every system is designed to do a particular task. Model is trained to do a particular thing. So ME is trained on medical language. GPT, of course, is a little more generic, but not so good in maths. That's why. So therefore, not like a human being who can be good in maths as well as biology. We don't have, or physics. We don't have systems which can do everything. However, multitasking is still less important to us right now. We can work on different AI agents provided the first parts of being explainable and able to justify what is the action taken, and make a human understand why the AI system took that decision. That's the most important aspect to us now, which is called as explainable AI. We can still work with different models for the time being. So This term explainable AI has become very important now, and we'll say why now. Why was it not important before? Because the models themselves were a lot more explainable before it became connectionist. That's really the issue. The However, connectionist AI has made way because it's capable of dealing with large data. However, the explainability part of it that allows human users to comprehend and trust the results of an AI system and the output created by the machine learning algorithms is missing. And it's a very important thing, because if we are talking about AI taking over a lot of decision, like the driver in the car, or writing content, therefore teaching people, then this part of explainability is very important to build trust in the system itself. Ability to interpret the system facilitates shared understanding between the computer scientists who are designing the system, the domain practitioners like the doctors or the financiers, and the end users who are the patients or the people who are investing money with the financiers. So all of it cannot be established unless the system itself is explainable. So the computer scientist has to understand why a particular decision is coming, then it can be conveyed to the doctors, and then only the doctors can convey it to the patient. So this is something very important to build systems which are not toy systems, but which are doing some real activity and really difficult activities. So it provides transparency, and it's needed to meet the regulatory requirements. So let's go into these examples. And whenever there are these high risk decisions like the uh, driverless car, or a patient who has come to the doctor for cancer treatment, and the doctor cannot just say that okay, I did this, because if the patient suffers, cannot say that I used the AI tool which told me to give you this medicine, so I have given. That's not going to save the doctor from the auditors. So that these are very high risk decisions, and therefore explainability is very important even for the situations where it is doing well. So even if it is doing well, without the explainability aspect of it, it's not possible to be used in those scenarios. That's why explainability is becoming very crucial for the models to have, and for all different kinds of applications. So here are some more examples. So a bank which deploys uh, an AI system will be asking the system, why is a person with good credit history denied a black loan, bank loan, if it's happening? So is it because it's biased, or what is it, what's happening? Unless they understand, they may be in trouble. So if some of you are working in banks, you know that the requirement of banks is that you have to show that all the decisions of the banks are happening according to certain rules and not in an arbitrary way. Same for the doctors. Why is a radiology image showing presence of malignant cells? Because if it's showing presence of malignant cells, it's a matter of huge expensive treatment for the patients. So without being convinced about it, it's not possible to deploy it. Why is the system predicting that between two persons, A and B, both convicted of light crimes, say at this point of time, the actual judgment depends on a risk calculation? That is the person prone to commit a heavier crime in future? Right now they have committed light crimes. Is the person prone to commit heavier crimes? And that can depend on a number of things which are not dependent exactly on the light crime, but on personal parameters. Now if both have exactly same personal parameters, yet the system is saying one is more prone than another, then it should justify why it is saying so. And because in a particular situation, such a system was deployed and it could not justify. Later analytics showed that the decisions were coming because the system itself had learned certain bias against color. Uh, Therefore, it was giving such decisions. It could not explain why it was giving such decisions, but later detailed analysis of the results showed that whenever a person was white and a person was black, both committed same crime, exactly same social background, then it was happening that the blacks were given more punishment, blacks were denied bank loan. So these are some of the things which are not acceptable to the regular organizations, and hence all the more focus on explainability. So, with that as the background, let us now see. Uh, and as I mentioned, all of these are success stories of how they could predict wrong or right. Why predict? They could not say, that's a separate matter, but they were actually having systems which were predicting, but they could not explain their decisions, and that is where neurosymbolic AI uh, made is making its presence felt, promising that it can actually help people build robust frameworks which are capable of reasoning, means generating explanations. This first part is even more important, though we haven't solved the problem at all, which is also that it can learn. So learning is also an essential attribute of all live systems, that uh, it's not only going to be, we know environment is not going to be static. So if it is reasoning about a decision taken today, then in future, if the circumstances change, it should change its decision and then again be able to reason why it's a new decision. And there is cognitive modeling, as I was saying, that whether it's actually the important aspects of the problem that are being taken into account while generating the reasoning, or is it that it's generating a reason, but that's not really an acceptable reason for different situations. So, all of these things become important while building serious AI applications. And these are some of the things which the connectionist systems did not provide. We'll take a look at some examples, and that's exactly where neurosymbolic AI, which attempts to integrate the connectionist or neural architectures and good old symbolic AI architectures, uh, can be made to talk to each other while building the applications and thereby address the weakness of each, and the sum of the parts is expected to be greater than the uh, individual parts themselves. So let's just now look at the definitions. We were just talking about why. So now let us get into the what part of it before we move to how. So this is what we traditionally called symbolic knowledge representation. And uh, so apple, it's an object. How did we represent the object um, in a symbolic domain? We tried to use some symbols to describe the apple. So we said, okay, an apple is from a tree. It's a tree-based product. Its structure is kind of round or spherical. It has a stem. It's classified as a fruit, and then also certain things which are more numeric, like size, and then color is red. Red is a symbol, and so on. So, without getting into what is red, how red is red, all those issues are there, but we didn't get into all those issues, and we just defined it. And that's what This is a simplistic definition, right? So if you get an apple which is uh, a light shade of red, almost pink, can that still be called apple? Because it's not red. So all these things we had to grapple with. We could not define what is the relationship between red and pink, because red is a word, red is a symbol, we give it a name, and pink is the name, we gave it to another color. So we could not really solve it because there's a very abstract and approximate representation. At the same time, it's very strict representation. If we call it red, can we call pink red also? So a lot of philosophical and complicated questions could not be answered using it. However, this is what was the basis for AI till 80s, and these kind of semantic structures were used to describe objects, which was called a symbolic representation of an object, or symbolic knowledge representation. There were a lot of even complex medical systems, like expert systems, if you have heard the name of Mycene, etc., were built using these kind of symbolic representations also. Because if you give it a thought, you will see, or if even if you talk to your doctor friends, you will see they do have an algorithm in their mind. Okay, you go, you present certain symptoms, which is here on the left hand side top box. Okay, you say you are suffering from profound dehydration, or some physical symptoms. Then they will actually ask you to do some tests, and the tests are actually defined by the symptoms or function of the symptoms. So they look at the symptoms and they decide that, okay, these symptoms may be something which is related to, so they have some diseases in mind, but to be sure, before they actually conclude the disease, they would ask you to do some tests like measure your blood glucose, serum osmolarity, and so on. So these are some fixed tests. So actually they do have some certain aspects in their mind which could be very well explained in this kind of a structure. All of these are symbolic names, and then um, based on also certain other parameters which are fundamental to the patient, like the age or past history and so on, and the diagnostic tests, then they would give some kind of treatment policy, some drugs, some procedures, some medical plan, some diet, whatever it is. So actually, it's like a symbolic flow of looking at the symptoms, then retrieving from the knowledge base what all tests should be done, what are the diseases that possibly have these symptoms, and therefore what are the tests should be done to eliminate some of the diseases and conquer on some of the diseases, and then give the treatment plan. So this seemed to be pretty simplistic, but actually could solve a few cases also. That's Mycene is one of the examples where such symbolic knowledge could be used to generate decisions. And this is how actually the decision trees output of the algorithms looked like, which was very easy for humans like doctors to actually interpret. So it said something like, if a particular attribute, it could be a blood attribute, it could be a measurement done from through some test, like checking of whether the vessels are open or not, like angiography or something, and then the whole thing could come out of those AI systems as uh, representing it as, if number of major vessels is uh, actually showing exercised induced angina, then move along some way. If it is not showing, then move along some way, go and check for thalassemia factor and so on. So it was all very easy to interpret, because the symbols in this particular thing, like thalassemia, sex, etc., are actually the same symbols that are used for representing the knowledge in the doctor's domain. So, AI systems were popular with doctors actually from that time, because even this is not a complete tree, this is a very small tree. So, a doctor always has to do this in her head. But if there is a system and she can do it in her head, provided she knows the domain. Now, a patient comes with a new disease where she doesn't know how to do this decision, then obviously an AI system can help her. Okay. If a patient comes with some combination of symptoms which she is not able to do, if she feeds those symptoms, she'll get an idea about, she'll get back from the system what are the possibilities, and so what are the tests to be done. She'll do the test, she'll give back the values over here, and then she'll know which way to proceed, and so on. So this was very convenient, and actually doctors loved these kind of systems. Similarly, we move to finance domain. Again, it has been used for quite some time for monitoring and flagging risky transactions. So all of us know from banks we get calls that did you do this transaction? So certain simple rules seem to be applying. Is it a high value transaction? Is the person in the same location as the person was 24 hours back, or is it suddenly a new location, and so on? So these were certain simple things. But as the type of parameters, number of parameters start getting complex, then there can be many more complex combinations of things that come in. Uh, and the model as such may become complex in order to understand why a particular transaction is flagged as risky, or for credit risk management, why is a person termed as a low risk person and so therefore can be given the loan, or a high risk person cannot be given the loan. So all these things actually, in both the cases, the bank will be bothered. If they cannot give the loan, then also they don't get customers, and if they get the loan, they have to be sure that they'll be able to recover. So therefore, model requirements to understand there's no bias, to understand, to have a model which does not have a lot of false positive rates, all these things, as well as understanding the core things, were very important. And again, symbolic AI was very good for them. So if they used algorithms like random forests, which is a collection of decision trees, where at each point of time they would be taking, that algorithm would be taking certain subset of attributes and seeing how those attributes are actually impacting the decision in the training set, then they finally give a set of factors which are called global explanations as significance of the features for classification. So if you read this, you will see that the first parameter, which is here, is very highly significant for determining the decision, whereas in the second parameter is actually identified as important by one of the classifiers. The other classifier says it's not so important, and so on. Similarly, content interest is something which is flagged as important by the red classifier but not by the blue classifier. Now, when the algorithms give output in this fashion, then a person who understands finance can actually match whether these parameters that are being given are really useful, do they matter, or is the algorithm doing some random things and they don't agree with the intuition of the person. So the person has some idea about the symbols and the parameters, but the person cannot exactly compute whether the significance is 0.35 or 0.25, because a human is not a computer. They cannot compute it on their head with thousands of data points from past, but they can have the algorithms tell them the significance, and they can validate, and thereby they can choose the algorithm of their choice based on their own domain knowledge. So that's how really symbolic AI work. And the same algorithms can also output how each individual feature worked for each individual prediction. So the left hand side is a global interpretation of the features. If you ask those algorithms that, okay, among all these, how much was the effect of a particular feature while taking a decision for person one on the left and person two on the right, it would be giving that also. So that kind of possibility also exists. Okay, now let us come to from symbolic AI, what's happening in neural networks. So symbolic AI was very good. Only thing is, it can become seriously complicated. So if you see this particular tree itself, as I said, it's with part of the features, and look at these values like greater than 135 and less than equal to 135. This is blood pressure. Then after that we may have greater than 160, less than 160, between 135. Here we can have less than 135, 125, 100, and so on. So therefore, from the data set itself, the tree can grow very unruly, and then it no more remains very good predictor also, and not very explainable also, not very useful also. So with more and more data, these kind of symbolic AI systems did not do so good. But we have the connectionist architectures, which we all know, which are nothing but actually at multiple stages they are transforming the inputs as combination of linear transformation and some non-linear transformations. And effectively what's happening is, given some inputs, they are converting it into a mathematical representation. So if I just look at the same symbolic apple that I had in my head of how an apple is defined, then in the connectionist architecture, there's no head. It's just an image of the apple. If I push through the architecture, after all these addition, multiplication, etc., for the tuples on the colors, etc., etc., so this white part is really the reflection of the light and so on. It's learning a vector representation, which if I look at two dimension, it's something like 4 and minus 2.5. Now these are just a two dimension. It makes no sense to me why this apple is 4 and minus 2.5. And if I look at what are the other things, I see king is 4 and 5, woman is 5 and 3, orange is 2.5 and minus 3, and so on. So the same connectionist architecture will be learning the representation of different words as vectors. 2 is just for showing. It's usually 500 dimension, 300 dimension, etc. So it's learning a representation. And once it is learning, it's doing a good job of learning the representation. So Apple 1, if it is 4 and minus 2.5, maybe Apple 2 will be 4.1 and minus 2.6. Okay, so it will do a good job of learning the representation. But for me to understand that 4 and minus 2.5 is apple, but minus 3 and 4 is football, is really a difficult task for humans to interpret. And that is what happens when we have these connectionist systems. Why they cannot explain is, they do such heavy maths through all these architectures, such a series of combinations and transformations is happening, that finally when we get the output or of classification, say something like diseased yes or no, there is no explanation of why, because it has undergone such a huge amount of transformation through all the mathematical manipulations. You just get a vector which is again added, subtracted through the classification layer, and then finally one of them has a higher probability and the other one has a low probability, so high probability prevails. But based on what originally, which factors came, we cannot understand. And that's what becomes a problematic situation, because in general what happens is when so this is an X-ray plate for radiologists who will see this, when in earlier absolutely in a manual situation, a human expert would look at this and give the decision fracture, but they'll say that there was comminuted intertrochanteric, whatever, very complicated words, involving the left femoral neck with avulsion of lesser trochanter. Now, we don't understand, okay, but at least the orthopedic and the radiologist, they understand what they are saying. Now, if we just get this kind of a disease, yes or no, it's not going to help, because the doctor won't believe the system, the radiologist won't believe the system unless they get some interpretation. So ideally, it could be if this image had some markings on it and some accompanying text, etc., then it would help. So, okay, why are we bothering? Neural architectures today are quite good at both. So, they are good at segmentation. So, they are good at kind of marking the portions which are important or not important. That's through image classification. When a lot of radiology images with fractured class goes through, we do have image segmentation architectures which can mark. And because we have language generation facilities, so we can also have mildly displaced whatever. So this is something that's getting generated once it has learned from the human interpretation of this. So this is somewhat possible. Then what is the problem? Why are we still talking about that it's not interpretable? Because explainability and generated text are not same. So when we get into actually trying to understand what has the neural system learned, we may end up, first of all, how do we do? Okay, one of the things is to look at each individual layer. That's what actually the interpretability people do. People who work on interpretability, they do. So they first look at all the data points and whatever their original classes are. So if I plot them on a two-dimensional space, then this is how the points are. And the way I have connected them is the way that human expert would like them to be connected. So they would say that these are all lying on the same path or the same organ. These are lying on different organs and so on. So whatever image inputs are coming, these are how the points are laid. Now, what happens is after we give in these inputs, output label is at the last end. You see, just after the first layer, some addition subtraction happens. What if after that, this is output from a particular system? What happened is these became connected together because of all the addition, subtraction, addition, multiplication, and the transformation, and not the ones that we had thought, human had thought should be connected. And then when it went to the second dense layer, then this is what happened. Third dense layer, again, this is what happened. And finally, at the output layer, what the system learned was that all these points belong to one space, which could be actually plotted on a manifold using, or are spread over a surface in this particular fashion, and it has completely lost track of what the original data was. So though you wanted that all these lines etc should be as it is. What the output layer has learned is a completely different representation of the input layer space. And it's not in our hands, because we can just add or drop a neuron, or change the bias, change the weights. That's all. Ultimately, what the system learned is completely mathematically controlled, and we have no control over what it is learning. We can do it again and again, that's a separate matter, but it's not guaranteed to actually learn what we wanted to learn. This is something that's at the crux of the problem of what it has learned, why it has learned this. These are not at all controllable with the neural architectures. And hence, even though we have very good systems, like I showed you, where the prediction of disease, of fracture, yes or no, can be correct 98% of the time, it can be generating very good text 98% of the time, and you have checked it on the training data with 50-fold cross validation, and you are very happy, you cannot deploy it in real life, because you cannot understand what it has learned. What if it has learned this instead of learning these surfaces? And then what if a new patient falls in that 2% erroneous set? Because we know that all these are also very representative, right? So there may be in reality points which are more on the lower side or upper side of this particular space. And you see, what the system has learned is a lower side curve. It has not taken too many data points from the upper side of the space at all. Maybe all of them are somehow approximated in the learning set. However, if our in the real life all of them come from the upper set, then this output system will be doing horribly badly. So in the learning time, it was 2% error. But what if now all the future samples come from this 2% set? You just cannot have any control. So, or something very different, that it's not close to any sample seen earlier. It's a very new kind of thing, and it will still make some assumption which is not explainable, and that becomes a huge issue. So we know the LLM also hallucinate. So I'll just so that was with the image representations. I'll just touch upon what we see in the LLM. So as we know, behind the scene, what's an LLM? It's just predicting the next word with a probability given a set of words. So it doesn't actually predict something knowledgeably. So if you give this, the cat jumped over the, it can predict mouse also, though we know cats are not likely to jump over a mouse. It's supposed to be pouncing on the mouse. It can say table also, because table also has quite a high probability. It can say moon also, because it doesn't understand what it is saying. It has seen such kind of text, like fox jumped over the moon is a very common term that is used for training. So if you say cat jumped over, it can say moon. It can say mouse, because cat and mouse come together. It can say anything depending on what's the context it has seen, and it's not likely that it's able to make any kind of judgment that cat is not likely to jump over the mouse, so maybe it's actually fence. So that's what we want, but it's not guaranteed to give that. And you have seen these very famous jokes which say that you can make it say anything, like 7 into 2 it can say 14. But then if you say that no, it's not that, I think it's 15, it will say okay, sorry, it is 15. Because it learns, if you say it is not, it will say okay, sorry. It has learned that it doesn't understand the 14 part of it, or the 7 into 2 14 part of it. And therefore they are not reliable. And even if we don't talk about generation, we talk about the models themselves just used as classifiers. It has been found that a little twisting of the words can make it very just change its decision completely. So here is what some experiments. So you say my friends insisted that I was too drunk to drive home, but I didn't listen. Is this a right thing to do or a wrong thing to do? So true label is it's wrong, because if you were drunk, then you should not drive. However, so if you ask it, it should say wrong. So you don't ask it this way because you want to prove that you were right in driving after getting drunk. So what you say is, my friends insisted that I was too drunk to drive home. As a result, I drove extremely slowly and carefully on my way home. So if you put it this way, it will say yes, right thing to do. Why does it say? Because it looks at these words like drove extremely slowly, carefully. It cannot do this analysis that uh, drunk person should not drive, whether it is too slow or not, and that too drunk actually. So it cannot do it. So it has been found that it's quite easy to fool it. Similarly, in cases where you want to know are you saying the right thing, so you say I poured the hot coffee into the cup, so that's a right thing, right? So it's not a wrong thing. But you say I dumped the burning hot coffee into the cup, it will say it's a wrong thing to do. So why? Because dumped is a word and it just blindly knows dumped is a bad thing to do, so it will say wrong. So it's been found that these are good. They can generate a lot of content, but really not doing it in any comprehensible way. And therefore, whatever good things we are getting, like generated text, etc., they are not always accurate. So the question that then came is, all this extremely good performance, accuracy, etc., is it coming at the cost of comprehensibility and therefore lack of explainability? And hence, we cannot really trust them. What is the way out from this? So that's where we get into this notion of trying to use some of the symbolic things like feature names, etc., that we had, along with the neural systems, the power. And the whole idea comes from Kahneman's model of human reasoning, where he says that humans actually have two different systems in their brain. The first system is responsible for all our sensory inputs. That's his surmise. Um, Lot of sensory inputs from the environment into symbols, and that's the symbolic part of it. So red, round, these are what we perceive when we see an apple. That's the perception of the environment part. But then there is a system two, where there is these are being mapped to knowledge, and therein that whole reasoning and cognition part of it happens, after which uh, after we do this symbol mapping. So red is mapped, the texture is mapped. So all these are individual maps. But after doing individual maps, you actually see whether the texture and the color, everything matches or not. So an apple is hard and orange is soft. So if the texture is soft but the color is red, then you don't say it's an apple. Okay, you may say, you may decide it's a football or whatever, but definitely it's not an apple. So all this combination of elements, how we go about doing it, that's the cognition part of it. And then whether it's a football or apple, that will dictate whether you will eat it or not. So that's analogy even if it's an apple, it's a spoiled apple, so you won't eat. So a lot of causality goes on inside the system too, which is actually reasoning and planning, and that is still something AI is not able to do. What is it that the current systems are actually doing? They are able to, the connectionist systems are able to use huge amount of signals. That's what really the powerless sorry, the driverless cars are doing. Huge amount of signals, huge amount of input data point from 3D images, radiology images, MRI images. All of these, the systems, AI systems are very capable of doing, which is actually helping them in perception. And therefore, they are able to say whether it's a bone, whether it's fractured, whether it's a chessboard, and so on. But after that, when it comes to actually cognition and thereafter using the knowledge part of it, this is somewhere where there's a lot of uncertainty, unknown aspects that are coming in, and the system 2 part is not at all well developed, the reasoning explanation part of it. So that's where machine learning can is working on the signal part of it, but we want to explore whether reasoning part of it, which is applying logic consciously by drawing conclusions, can be done by using some of the things that we did in the good old way by using the symbols, because that's what in an abstraction we do in our heads. And that's where the neural architectures from which are very good at learning from the large data is being thought about combining with the knowledge abstractions, where the knowledge abstraction structures are pretty well defined now, and then we would like to use them in architectures for causal reasoning. So this is what neuro symbolic AI architectures today look like. It's actually expected to take in input from both, or it's expected to be a hybrid of the symbolic and the neural architectures, and then provide whatever the neural provided, like data efficiency, robustness. At the same time, they will provide interpretability and generalizability also. So, what is that structure? We have seen a little bit in the symbol. Now, what's becoming very popular as the structure for knowledge storing, even very vast amounts of knowledge, is called knowledge graphs. So, knowledge graphs are capturing world knowledge in the form of entities and relations. I don't know whether you're able to see it very clearly. So, this is a very common knowledge graph you may have come across, which is actually storing the information about products in a store and about people who are buying the products. And so, what we are seeing is shopper A buys a shoe which is actually either gray or blue, so which one the person has bought, and so on. So all that information can be stored. There are different kinds of knowledge graphs. So that is a knowledge graph about information about transactions. There are knowledge graphs which are storing information about words, so not about entities like products or shoes, etc., or buyer. Here it's just word. And actually, this is a kind of knowledge graph which all of us have grown up with. We have all used dictionaries, thesaurus, and so on. So that's also, this is a digital version of it, because we do use a lot of dictionary knowledge when trying to understand things. And this is a digital version of it, which is telling it what's a bicycle, what's its other language information, other language names, what is it, it's a two-wheel vehicle, it has wheels, and so on. So ConceptNet is a kind of knowledge graph which is storing information just about words, not about named entities. On the other hand, we have knowledge graphs. In fact, Google popularized the term knowledge graph, which is about entities also. So a whole lot of knowledge graphs are there. So Google made this knowledge graph of, first, it started making about people who were very often searched, so that they could keep all the information about these important people at one place. And when someone is searching, it's not hitting the indexed repository, rather it is going and finding the entity whose name matches the search, and then they are looking at the associated properties. Like, Satya Nadella is CEO of Microsoft. Microsoft was founded by Bill Gates, and Bill Gates' spouse is Melinda Gates, and so on. So it was storing these as knowledge graphs by gathering the information partially manually, partially parsed from all the web pages. And it was actually also thoroughly inspected to ensure that the knowledge graph is correct. Simultaneously, there was a free-based knowledge graph which was built from Wikipedia entities. Today, Google Knowledge Graph has bought Freebase, and all of them together have huge knowledge graph structures which looks like this. So this neurosymbolic AI is not a hoax. There is positive uh, effort to actually store knowledge. What we call knowledge is something like facts about entities, between two entities, among multiple entities, because people have realized that if you don't store the facts, just let them become numbers in a scenario, then you lose the interpretability of, or the knowledge about the entities. So in reality, there are many different, so we saw ConceptNet, we saw Google Knowledge Graph, there are Open Multilingual WordNet, OpenSig. So if you have wondered that, how suddenly all these became so powerful and also good, it's also because a lot of information was actually curated and stored in structures which are much more controlled than open source just learning as vectors. So this is what we encountered earlier also. Only thing is, it's not so small now. Concept graphs for health, again by Google Knowledge. If you have noticed, when you search on a disease name, it actually says symptoms, hospitals, this, that, because those are the concepts for a medical entity. There's disease, there's infection, autoimmune, medication, patient. Exactly, this is the structure using which it served information on web pages, and so that it's not very random, because the searches that people made have more often a, a kind of path. So if you search for a disease, then you would want to know what are the symptoms, what are the treatments, where do you go for a treatment, and what are the tests that usually doctors give. So they actually tried to organize all this knowledge in the form of a knowledge graph and present this structure also to the end user, so that you can go and click, okay, you want to know about an infection, and then you click, it will show you only the infection, then it won't show you autoimmune disease. So that way search became very useful. Now this was another very interesting, this is actually another very interesting, when people saw that storing knowledge is making an activity like search useful, then they also started collecting something very different. It's not about just common entities like famous people or famous movies, it's about scientific facts. And this is called World Tree. And this is version 2. Lot of scientific facts. If you drill down, you will see things like temperature, heat, energy, that's a scientific term, what it means, what are the sources of temperature or heat, what happens when there is heat change, and so on. So, whatever can be defined scientifically, all these facts have been collected. There are three colored nodes you can see. One is the core object entities, one is source of, one is the changes that it undergoes, one is a subclass. So there are all these different kinds of information that is stored in it, and again it's huge. It's about 1 billion or more than that entities that are there in this. So now knowledge graphs have been used. I showed you the retail knowledge graph. It's a graph. It has been used for quite some time now as something to do link prediction. So here is a knowledge graph which is about people. So Barack Obama was born in Honolulu and has lived in places like Chicago. So this is what it is saying. It is not saying Barack Obama had lived in Honolulu. But if I understand the semantics of place of birth, then I can infer, right? Anyone who understands place of birth will be able to infer that Barack Obama must have lived in Honolulu at some point of time. So, this relation did not exist physically but can be inferred due to the semantics of the relations that are there. So, this was actually what knowledge graphs were initially used for, initially, as in the 2000s, where to predict new kind of knowledge that was not explicitly stored, and heavily, I did show you in that graph, if you see later, these were used by recommender systems, that if A buys B and B is often bought with C, then can you predict A will buy C? And then if you can predict A will buy C, then you recommend C to A when A is buying B. So this was the use of knowledge graph. As you can see, knowledge graphs were something that came directly from the idea of how symbolic knowledge was stored. But the difference here is these knowledge graphs are not so small as Apple with its 20 properties. These are knowledge graphs built of real life entities, so they are really huge in size, with billions of entities and trillions of relations. Now, the moment you go to that kind of size, there is the question of how you will use them in your algorithms, how you will actually manipulate such kind of knowledge, information. These are now no more simple hand traversal is not possible, and that's where primarily the neuro-symbolic architectures came into place. So here in this diagram itself, you see two classes of architecture. One is lowering and another is called lifting. So in the lowering architecture, what was used was called knowledge compression. So the graphs themselves, knowledge graph themselves, were converted into embeddings. How? Every edge in the knowledge graph, like Michelle Obama, places lived, event 21, location Chicago, this whole thing is just like a sentence. You can view it like a sentence. So every path, every edge in the knowledge graph can be actually looked at like a sentence, and then people use the same embedding techniques, only here it's graph embedding technique, because you also have to keep track that Michelle Obama was a node. So here you embed the path Michelle Obama, event 21 Chicago, and Barack Obama, event 8, Barack Obama, marriage, event 8, spouse, Michelle Obama as another one. But Michelle Obama is one node, so you use the node ID and you generate appropriate embeddings. This is what was called. So the moment you go from huge knowledge structures to embeddings, you have embeddings of nodes, you have embeddings of paths, relations. Uh, it's in a smaller space, so you may have billions of nodes and trillions of relations, but overall the whole thing becomes maybe a 500 dimensional space or a 1000 dimensional space in which you have embedded points, which are points representing nodes or uh, relations. So the first kind of architectures, a lot of them, particularly the link prediction ones, were using knowledge graphs as their embedding, which made them large scale, robust. But you may again ask, were they explainable? Obviously, no. Did they have more explainability? Not much, because the moment you turn them into embeddings, it will predict these path as front and end. But again, the whole point that it must have predicted because places of birth and places lived were similar is again lost. So lowering has been used, but user explainability is still low. I'll share the slides. I have given all the references. You can look up. So what happened is, this is something that was started with. So it's a neural representation of symbolic knowledge. That's what was used to come up with relations or predictions which are more semantic in nature, like because Barack Obama was born in Honolulu, so we can say he lived there. It's a very semantic interpretation that could be done using the knowledge graph, not otherwise. And that's the first kind of architectures which used it. What we are moving towards now is more a kind of handshaking or talking or interactively using the neural representations as well as the symbolic knowledge representations, moving to and fro between them and trying to design the applications in such a way so that the explainability part at least becomes either medium or high. So here they were low still in the first category of architecture. We move towards federated pipelines, where we use a combination of both without spoiling their inherent capabilities of handling large scale data. That is for connectionist architecture, for neurals, and for symbolic, the explainability part, and then have our uh, architectures which uses both of them to provide better explainability. So this is one example where a federated pipeline is being designed to solve, to use LLMs, but use LLMs in a slightly better way. So here is what it says: assuming it takes an hour to prepare for the drive, how much time should be allotted for the total journey by car from New York City to LA? Now, you see, when it's given to LLM API, it's completely ignoring the first part, assuming it takes an hour. And this is the LLM API with chain of thought. It says driving time is actually 41 hours. That's what it is finding by searching the net, and it is giving this answer. This is actually the exact time, driving time. What you need, you understand, assuming it takes an hour to prepare, that is not what it is capable of doing. So this is what was proposed as an architecture, that can you have a federated architecture where you will get the answer from the LLM, whatever chain of thought, but to it you actually have to add one. So you tell the LLM that you take this answer and then go and add one. So this is what was proposed by Wolfram Alpha. That's one version. With which was Wolfram Alpha, as you know, they have mathematical software where they want the use the LLMs, but they want that all these kind of queries which have a mathematical component should be mapping to some kind of mathematical functions that's to be learned. What is that's to be learned from the symbol. So assuming it takes this, what is the total time? The total is indicated that it's an additive function. So what it wants is the prompt should make sure that it understands some with some symbolic knowledge that total means it's a summation of the two factors that are given over here. And then if you ask what is the total time, then the 41 that's coming from the Google search will get added to 1, and then 42 will be the right answer. So I'll now quickly take you through a few applications. I know time is up actually. So do you want me to go through?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am, and we can also have a QA session in the end, like a short QA
Yeah,
session.
I'll just try to go through these applications first, then I think you will have a lot of QA. So these are all different papers. I'll quickly take you through how they have applied these integrated federated architecture. Some have applied the symbolic knowledge at the end. So here this is one example of image recognition. As you will see, the initial part, I hope you can see my mouse. Initial part, there is no change. You given the image input. uh, so these are some of the input. So your input is actually an aeroplane, and here you want the output, and as usual we have the softmax function to say whether this what object is this. It's learned from millions of objects, as you know. Now it can say anything. So you say this aeroplane is very similar to a bird, but you want that while learning, it should actually learn that an aeroplane is more similar to a car than it is to a bird. Now, how do you actually make it learn that way? That is what is the semantics of things. So, while teaching aeroplanes, what you do is you manipulate the loss function by incorporating a semantic loss component in it. The semantic loss component says that whenever you are making a mistake in recognizing something as something else, then the total loss is a distance between the two objects in the knowledge hierarchy. So you see, if you are mistaking an airplane for a propeller plane, your loss is much less. But okay, if you are making a mistake of airplane with rocket, it's slightly more than airplane and propeller plane, but it's not as much as if you are making a mistake between an airplane and a car. And you see, bird is nowhere in this because bird will be somewhere else, much farther away in a hierarchy of all things. So vehicle is inanimate, there will be animate, inanimate, and bird will be under animate. So when you are learning, at that point itself, if the semantic loss is incorporated, then it will not make the inference solely based on shape and color, but also on where the individual objects labels actually fell in the hierarchy during the training itself. So during training, obviously, this was a bird, this was an aeroplane, this was a car. So initially, it may have made a mistake. Aeroplane is bird, but then the loss was high, so it would be rectified to make a mistake of aeroplane, if at all, towards more towards rocket, uh, less towards bird. Okay, and there are ways of computing it efficiently as probability functions on trees. Again, if you read the paper, you will see that these are how the probabilities are assigned to the objects at the time of training based on what are the labels and how far the labels are from each other on the knowledge graph. I have shown you the knowledge graphs, they are pretty complex. So the entire focus is on the loss function and how to compute the loss function very efficiently using a symbolic knowledge representation structure. This is another interesting paper which used again a loss function. However, it didn't use the loss function the way the earlier one used, not at the end. It actually used the hierarchy to select its training samples correctly. So, what it said was when you are training and a network with a dog as an example, then you white dog really, then you give other pictures of white dogs which are different from this and call it a positive sample, so that it doesn't learn that a white dog only looks like this. It learns white dog can be small in green background and so on. And then you give a sample which is called a weak negative sample, which is other dogs. So it's a fatter dog, it's a brown dog, and so on. So give it a negative, but weak negative, and then give it a strong negative sample. So a strong negative sample is something which has white furry objects, but it's a mop, it's not a dog at all. So its label will be mop, this label will be dog, this label will be white dog, and all of them will be somewhere in the word net, as we saw. So these WordNet glove embeddings, as it uses it entirely at the uh, input level and nothing at the output level. So this is the difference. Here the symbolic knowledge graph is used at the interpretation end to change the loss function. Here it's used to select the training samples wisely and then train the network with a semantic aware loss, where it's learning the mistake of uh, calling a white dog a brown dog and a white dog a mop. So these are the different kind of mistakes. The mistake is much low if it is actually calling this white dog a small white dog. So that's the way the semantic aware triplet loss function was used. Uh, Again, it improved the performance. Now I'll quickly show you some text applications, and more than the method, just look at how advantageous it becomes when we use or keep on switching between the symbolic and the neural applications. So this is our work where we wanted to do predictive analytics, that at the admission time, when people are admitted to ICUs, there is a need for hospital management to predict how long the person will be in ICU. That's a very important logistic hospital management problem, because ICUs are premium resources. Every hospital has only a very few ICUs with lot of instruments. They don't want to send away patients by not giving ICU, because ICUs are expensive. That's the way they earn. At the same time, they cannot overcome it, because ICU means a person needs ICU, the person needs ICU. You cannot give them some other bed. So this is a very important problem. So the problem is, at the time of admission, can you predict? People have a lot of work has been done in this for years, but people did not use the text. Text, using text which is all kinds of reports, the nurses' observation, doctors' observation, drugs, etc., is fairly new, because the BERT and all that has made it very good to generate good embeddings. So the problem was predict number of days at ICU. So we started working at our first thing was use the entire text, and this is the architecture that we use to predict long or short stay, and also whatever kind of interventions a person may need in ICU. It's a multi-objective architecture, and good, we got quite good performance, publication, everything. But as I mentioned, with all these hospital things, you do need a justification for the decision, because ultimately this note becomes a vector. This note becomes a vector. Now, from this vector, how do I even understand why is this a long admission predicted, and why is this a short admission predicted? So impossible to understand from the numbers. But if we go back to the words themselves, maybe there were some hints, like usually what we have, like this person was weak over the day, but um, whatever, head on a some indicators would be there in the text itself. So one kind of this is a very popular explainability architecture used with neural networks. We also used it initially, which is called local interpretable model agnostic applications. It will tell you the exact words in the note that contributed to the decision long and the decision short for the second patient. Decision long for the second patient and short for the first patient. So as we see, it was for the first patient, if we go inside, it's only pancreatitis possibly, which is long, and which was long, but otherwise diet, stable is very important, sleeping is important. These contributed factors which must have contributed for it to be in the short category. This person was intubated, which means it's a serious issue, and that's what contributed to long. So Lime offers these kind of facility. How does Lime work? Lime takes a local neighborhood and then sees what are the differences in this by building a linear regression model, and that's how it's a popular one. But local interpretability is obviously not robust, so it's only giving me based on very close neighbors of these two patients or a particular patient, and then seeing among the neighbors who are long, who are short, and what is more common among the long and short. But there are short here also, there are long here also, all those are not taken. So Lime is good but not very good. And then one of the key issues is we have used words, and even with vector embeddings, we are not sure whether diabetes and high blood sugar have been mapped to the similar vectors, and whether these are also taken care of by Lime, because Lime is not using the vectors. Lime is using the actual words. So all the issues that remain with symbolic were solved by neural, now comes back in the interpretability part. So what was good? Good was earlier whatever we used, like named entities, concepts, etc. And that is where again the knowledge graphs come back. So what we do is, rather than in the second step, rather than using the records as it is, we didn't take all the words or the records as it is, but rather we first tried to resolve the records using what's a medical concept graph. SNOMED is a very popular, and it's actually a medical dictionary called Unified Medical Language Systems, which again, you see a lot of hard manual work goes into building these systems, which are symbolic knowledge representations, which says that there are many ways of addressing the same thing, and we go back to good old uh, method of looking up these symbolic dictionaries and converting all these records into first a feature space. If you remember your classical machine learning working with decision tables or linear regression, we had these feature space. So we build feature space with the symbols, and then we do a binary mapping whether patient 1 has a feature or doesn't have a feature. So patient 1 has accidental fall, patient 2 also has, but patient 1 has anxiety, patient 2 doesn't have. So from text, we are going to the symbolic representations. We are creating some symbolic representation, but we, again, the number of features is now very high. In the old systems, we only had some 10, 40, 30 features. They were not big data. And we also want to learn from very large numbers of patients, because that's where the power lies. So we have now a very wide set of features, but the features are recognizable, and we have very deep set of records, number of patients. So now we, as I was saying, we keep on moving back and forth between neural and symbolic. So first, using symbolic, we convert into a feature space which is more understandable, but then we go and use a neural representation like autoencoders to create vector representation of each patient. So we don't keep the patient in terms of the features, but we create autoencoders. And then this is just to show you how good was the autoencoding. We actually try to see, so we clustered these auto-encoded vectors, and then when we plot them on a particular space, we want to see, who are all these blue points. As you can see, the blue ones are close together. These are all one particular cluster, cluster 10. Then the green ones are cluster 4, and so on. Now, who are these clusters? Again, these are plots of neural embeddings, not understandable. So again, I go back to the explanation by symbols. And in this case, there's a SHAP explainer which uses game theoretic concepts to generate the interpretations. So now you remember that every point has a neural embedding and also has this particular representation which was on the symbolic space. So we have two representations for each patient. One is the symbolic one and one is the neural one. So we can play around between these two. Whenever we want to do a prediction, we can use the neural representation because neural predictive systems are good. But whenever we want explanations, we can move to the feature space. And this is how SHAP, I'm not going into the details, it's a probabilistic way of looking at how each cluster is, uh, how intra-cluster points are similar in terms of what features, and inter-cluster points are different in terms of what features based on the feature space. And now I can have very good clustered descriptions which are understandable. So it's not that they are blue and close to each other, but I can see cluster 0 are actually diabetic patients with endometriosis, whereas cluster 1 patients have influenza, very different from cluster 0. Cluster 2 patients have heart problems, they have abnormality of atrium and so on. So I can see so many things. I can understand my clusters. I can see that my clusters are good because they are all different and people in the same cluster is same. And okay, this is a gross representation of all the clusters. And then I use the neuro symbolic element now to also redefine my predictive architecture by saying that, okay, now that I have a patient, whenever a patient comes, let me also try and see which cluster the patient belongs to, because only with the neural representation I won't be able to say. Even if I see the feature space of a new patient, I won't be able to say on the 4000 dimension. But if I know which cluster the patient belongs, then I can actually go back to this whole cluster representation and say, okay, the patient belongs to cluster 0. That means has endometriosis, has diabetes, and for this particular cluster, the average number of days was 7 days. So if I have got something around 6 or so, I know that it's because the person belongs to this cluster. That's why this is the prediction. So that's how we use both the symbolic and the neural systems in order to generate explanations. And now let me move to the last application, which is also very new and something that many of you may be researching on, that how do we use common sense? That's something that the AI systems seem to be not having. Now that I have so many knowledge structures which are storing scientific facts, which are storing word level information, which are storing information about every object in the world, can I actually use all these information to have some common sense question answering systems? So here is one work which was, where is a frisbee in play likely to be? So the idea was, if you ask a AI system to answer, it tells you it's air. You can train the system, right? You can just say, okay, given this input, this is the output most likely. But that's not intelligent. That's not explainable. So you want to give scientific explanation, and you want this to train the system to say that it's air because a frisbee floats on air. That's the kind of system that you want to make. So that means from all these facts of all the objects, it has to pick up this line or generate this line and give that as the explanation. That's ambition. That was ambition number one. Now, a latest ambition number two is, it's not enough just to say this, but can you improve upon that explanation by saying why it is air in a positive way, and also say why it is not outside, not park, not roof, not tree in that's negative properties. So you say a frisbee is a concave plastic disc designed for skimming through the air as an outdoor game. Okay, that's why it is air. So this is a positive property that's picked up from the world knowledge base to support the answer air. And here it's picking up facts from world knowledge base to say why it is not outside. So what was the question? Where is a frisbee in play likely to be? So it's saying a frisbee can be outside anytime, even while not in play. Therefore, outside is not the answer, and so on. And then they also wanted to generate a free flowing generative text to, just like you would explain an answer to a child. A frisbee is a concave plastic disc, and so on. So let me quickly just give you the idea of how this solution is made. So this is the same world tree that we saw. It has scientific facts, and the idea is that there is a notated data set with the question, with the answer sentences, and a relative marking of which sentences are a right explanation for the answer. So that was the first work that only gave one line scientific explanation, as I was showing. So the idea is, you have all the facts. Obviously, the facts are related to other facts through the words. So a solution space for finding the explanations will have to move in this graph, which is a very complex graph where every word every sentence, a sentence is connected to other sentence if it shares words. Now one sentence is more connected to another sentence if it shares many words than a sentence with whom it shares fewer words. That's the common logic. So it's a graph traversal problem, and it's a sentence embedding, graph embedding, that we have discussed earlier. So the graph is nothing but sets of sentences which are connected to each other by shared words, shared concepts, and BERT as a system was used to give the question, give the answer, give a fact, and learn whether it's a classification regression kind of problem, learn whether that fact is relevant, irrelevant, standard birth classification, or learn a regression, how relevant. It's a instead of softmax, you can use a sigmoid function to say it's relevant by zero 0.6 or zero 0.3 or 0.01 or whatever. So it's a very intuitively simple architecture. Obviously, it took a lot of effort to annotate and generate the answers. Now, this is the last work that I'm explaining, which is the other one, as I said, very similar approach. Only thing is, here they wanted many more supports. So, not just one line scientific explanation, but positive properties, negative properties, but all from the same thing, same world tree. So, not very difficult if you think about it. Only thing is, it's now a 4-class classification. So you pick up a fact and say whether it's a negative explanation and for which alternative, outside or park or whatever. You pick up positive fact, which means positive fact is for air. So it models for the task in a very similar way. It also uses a BERT mechanism, but it actually says that if you don't find a positive fact, then that means you are not able to say give a comprehensive explanation. If you are not able to find the negative explanations, then it is not refutation complete. That means you are not able to say why it is here and why it is not outside. Again, something is lacking in the scientific explanation. So what you will appreciate is that these kind of systems become very important if you are thinking about designing actual tutoring systems. That you tell an answer to a student, you want to design an AI system where a student can ask a question, the AI system can give some answer, but is the answer right? How will a science student verify? They'll see whether it is giving a justification for the correct answer and it's giving justification for the wrong answers too. And then it also, so S BERT is sentence BERT with a classifier is used for the positive and negative facts, and then they use GPT-2 for generating the free flow, which is nothing but a free flow is a like giving all of these as context and asking it to generate a cohesive sentence. So that's all. I'm not going into this application. In summary, I hope I have been able to convey that neurosymbolic is very important to add explainability to answers in multiple different ways. For medical, for finance, it's explainability in terms of the core features. For scientific explanation, it's giving explainability or adding the causal factor to the generation itself. That's the difference. If it's generating an answer, then it should say or follow a certain principle to make sure that the generation is logical. So that's where neurosymbolic AI is being used to make the current highly scalable, robust AI systems also to become more intelligent and actually answer questions which are very important, whether they come from philosophy or from domain experts or from linguistic experts, that uh, whether they are right, wrong, why are they right. So, a lot of questions which are still not answered, but hope is that neurosymbolic AI can help us answer some of them. So, thank you very much. I am sorry. I think I have taken much more time than.
Thank, thank you, madam. That was really a very detailed lecture, and I'm sure after this, many of us will be interested in this field. So, like, we have a couple of questions, ma'am. I think
Yes.
there is a question in the chat box. I'll just read
I
it out.
think you can just speak, whoever. Yeah. Either you read
Toshin
out.
Toshin Akhtar has asked a question. Basically, he's asking majorly post hoc methods have been used for explaining model predictions. How does neurosymbolic framework contribute towards an inherently interpretable end-to-end explainable system?
No, so that is what post hoc was. I don't know. You may have asked it till about the uh, health application, but as we saw the last one, it's actually trying to build in the explainability into the framework itself with knowledge, right?
We have another question. It's by Ankita Chaudhary. Ankita, please, may I ask you?
Good evening, ma'am. First of all, thank you for such a wonderful session. It was very
Thank
much insightful. Well, as a student of history, I'm aware of an ever existing confusion which is regarding the different historical interpretation by different historians. And as I have often used ChatGPT to, evaluate my answers or any of my confusions, despite a good answer, they sometimes lack structural knowledge regarding the topic. Can we solve this issue with the help of neurosymbolic AI?
See, multiple interpretations is a very different thing, right? It exists already. So, um, I was just in a meeting last month which was on ontologists. Ontology is a conceptual way of representing knowledge. I mean, a precursor to knowledge graphs, you can say. Now, we assume that an ontology is a fixed structure. So, there's only one way of defining things. But definition and interpretation are very different. So, there can be different ways of interpreting the same thing, right? But what you would like is that uh, if a particular interpretation is picked up to give an answer, then it should cite that interpretation rather than leave it blank or mixing up all the interpretations. So, when we talk about explainability, we talk about some kind of provenance, okay, that why this answer was given. So it should say that this is because this is according to XYZ's interpretation. And why we pick up XYZ's interpretation is because maybe XYZ is most respected in this field, that is most cited paper or something like that. That's what we call explainability. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, we have one more questions by Soham. Soham, can you just introduce and ask your question?
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
So, yeah, ma'am. Thank you for this talk. I think we were waiting for this talk since a long time. So, I'm a PhD scholar in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at IIT Delhi. So, actually, I have a question. So, I work in modeling infectious diseases, their transmission, and various policies in this. So it was just 2 days back that I was asked a question in a departmental presentation. that because I work in modeling epidemiological models. I work in developing epidemiological models for disease transmission. Currently, this is very recent. This is something which I haven't explored till now. But how do you find how do you think that the use of artificial intelligence? Uh, I guess that some of this information, this prediction of disease spread and everything, will be based on different epidemiological models, that the data or the pattern that might have been observed through these models. How do you think that AI in general is playing a role in predicting infectious outbreaks, or in predicting how the infection will turn out to be, how it will spread? And what do you think in this situation is the future of epidemiological modeling? Where does it lie? So this is my question. Yeah.
So, yeah, because see, right now, you can use a lot of heterogeneous knowledge together, right? So, uh, the spread of a disease may depend on different factors. Okay, it can be from, like, certain diseases are spread because of, say, direct transmission when people are traveling together. So because you are working in this area, you will be knowing that people have used prediction models based on people's movement data, and that also came from tweets when people were saying, I'm traveling from X to Y. And then if that person had earlier said, I have a cough or whatever, then they were predicting that if a lot of people with cough yesterday are traveling from X to Y today, then tomorrow in Y, this influenza will spread. You search for it, you will see that people have used. So there's tweet, there's NLP of the tweet, and there is a prediction model which is saying how many people are moving from X to Y, and what's the number that's required to ensure that Y will also have the disease at epidemic level. So lot of data to support all of this. Obviously, one person moves from X to Y doesn't get it at epidemic level. But if X already has it at epidemic level, and every day, so all these models were used for influenza, for COVID, and so on, for spreading. Now, the more interesting part is, there it was transmitted, right? There can be so many diseases which are not just transmitted just like that from there, but it may be because of the food that people are eating, food habits, or some other habits, and that's not easy to capture, but the knowledge may be in biomedical literature. So if you really think of how to combine knowledge that's in biomedical literature and what is in the data, so in the data you have how many people got the disease, when, where, whatever, that's your data. It doesn't have the knowledge about how the disease spreads, maybe, but that may be something in literature. So we work from in IIT Jodhpur only with Professor Mukherjee. I work a lot on rare diseases. Okay, so there are a lot of latent concepts in how a disease manifests, how a disease spreads, and these latent concepts may not be in uh, the data itself, it may be somewhere else. So if you combine knowledge from various sources, you get better epidemiology models. That's what I believe. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think yes, ma'am. I think I get some idea regarding this topic. I mean, the question. I think some
Yeah, so
idea
the
I
whole
get
idea
from
is people earlier used only one set of data, but really the solution may be in using multiple different types of data, and how do you combine them? So to combine them, you have to use knowledge, and that's where again neurosymbolic comes in.
I think then I think like it modeling use of AI to model I think to predict and to model outbreaks then becomes a very different subject altogether in itself. I think it's a whole new domain then. If I compare it with the traditional epidemiological models, right,
Yeah,
ma'am?
yeah, yeah.
In
Yes.
this manner. Thank.
Thank you, Soham, for your question. So, ma'am, actually, I also have a question.
Yeah.
Basically, like I was just thinking, like how are we building up this model? Like suppose like we are basically interpreting symbolic AI as well as an output of a typical neural network, including larger models, language models, one at a time, or like are we is like my question is basically if I take a kg, say a kg of a large database, like large data set, and I fine tune a large language model with that kg, and I try
Hmm.
to get an output. Is it also an application of neurosymbolic AI?
Yes. So if you look at these papers, common sense question answering and explanation based common sense question answering, they have actually used it. But the challenge is, see, as we are saying, uh, large scale knowledge, right? So if you look at it, they have human annotated thousands of data,
Okay.
okay, because they are large models themselves. So human annotation of 1,000 data points is difficult. They have annotated about 30,000, 70,000 such question answers for answering. Now, of course, they have done it in semi automated ways to uh, make it faster. They have used a lot of tools, but that is one of the key problems that I mean that has to be done. That how the knowledge will be used. If you can make it give enough examples. So in my slides I have the references to the papers. If you go to it, you will see that large numbers of points were used, but after that, uh, hopefully, it can answer or work on another 10,000 or 1 billion data points. That's the advantage.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. So I think we do not have any more questions.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we have utilized the entire time that you gave.
That's fine, ma'am. That was really an insightful session. Like, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to Professor Lipika De for sharing her extensive knowledge and expertise with us today. So, ma'am, I'll
Thank
share this. I'll share the video in YouTube and also share it with you. And kindly, if you can share the slide with us, so that
I will
many of
share
us
with
can.
you the slides.
I'll
Yes.
share it with the group. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your
Yeah.
time.
Thank you.